Rokuro-Kubi. Nearly 500 years ago, there was a samurai named Isogai Ehidazeemon Taketsura in the service of the Lord Kikuji of Kyushu. This Isogai had inherited, from many warlike ancestors, a natural aptitude for military exercises and extraordinary strength. While yet a boy, he had surpassed his teachers in the art of swordsmanship, in archery, and in the use of the spear, and had displayed all the capacities of a daring and skillful soldier. Afterwards, in the time of the Ikkyo War, he so distinguished himself that high honors were bestowed upon him. But when the house of Kikuji came to ruin, Isogai found himself without a master. He might then easily have obtained service under another daimyo, but as he had never sought distinction for his own sake alone, and as his heart remained true to his former lord, he preferred to give up the world. So he cut off his hair and became a traveling priest, taking the Buddhist name of Kwaidan, but always under the koromo of the priest. Kwaidan kept warm within him the heart of the samurai. As in other years he had laughed at peril, so now also he scorned danger. And in all weathers and all seasons, he journeyed to preach the good law in places where no other priest would have dared to go. For that age was an age of violence and disorder, and upon the highways there was no security for the solitary traveler, even if he happened to be a priest. In the course of his first long journey, Kwaidan had occasion to visit the province of Kai. One evening, as he was traveling through the mountains of that province, darkness overcame him in a very lonesome district, leagues away from any village. So he resigned himself to pass the night under the stars, and having found a suitable grassy spot by the roadside, he lay down there and prepared to sleep. He had always welcomed discomfort, and even a bare rock was for him a good bed, when nothing better could be found, and the root of a pine tree an excellent pillow. His body was iron, and he never troubled himself about dews or rain or frost or snow. Scarcely had he lain down when a man came along the road, carrying an axe and a great bundle of chopped wood. This woodcutter halted on seeing Kwaidan lying down, and after a moment of silent observation, said to him in a tone of great surprise, "What kind of a man can you be, good sir, that you dare to lie down alone in such a place as this? There are haunters about here, many of them. Are you not afraid of hairy things?" "My friend," cheerfully answered Kwaidan, "I am only a wandering priest, a cloud and water guest, as folks call it, unsi no ryokaku. 2. And I am not in the least afraid of hairy things, if you mean goblin foxes or goblin badgers or any creatures of that kind. As for lonesome places, I like them. They're suitable for meditation. I am accustomed to sleeping in the open air, and I have learned never to be anxious about my life." "You must be indeed a brave man, Sir Priest," the peasant responded, "to lie down here. This place has a bad name, a very bad name. But, as the proverb has it, kunshi ayayuki ni chikayorazu unsu tez, the superior man does not needlessly expose himself to peril. And I must assure you, sir, that it is very dangerous to sleep here. Therefore, although my house is only a wretched thatched hut, let me beg of you to come home with me at once. In the way of food, I have nothing to offer you, but there is a roof at least, and you can sleep under it without risk." He spoke earnestly, and Kwaidan, liking the kindly tone of the man, accepted this modest offer. The woodcutter guided him along a narrow path, leading up from the main road through mountain forest. It was a rough and dangerous path, sometimes skirting precipices, sometimes offering nothing but a network of slippery roots for the foot to rest upon, sometimes winding over or between masses of jagged rock. But at last, Kwaidan found himself upon a cleared space at the top of a hill, with a full moon shining overhead, and he saw before him a small thatched cottage, cheerfully lighted from within. The woodcutter led him to a shed at the back of the house, whither water had been conducted, through bamboo pipes from some neighboring stream, and the two men washed their feet. Beyond the shed was a vegetable garden and a grove of cedars and bamboos, and beyond the trees appeared the glimmer of a cascade, pouring from some loftier height and swaying in the moonshine like a long white robe. As Kwaidan entered the cottage with his guide, he perceived 4 persons, men and women, warming their hands at a little fire kindled in the RO of the principal apartment. They bowed low to the priest and greeted him in the most respectful manner. Kwaidan wondered that persons so poor and dwelling in such a solitude should be aware of the polite forms of greeting. These are good people, he thought to himself, and they must have been taught by someone well acquainted with the rules of propriety. Then turning to his host, the Aruji, or housemaster as the others called him, Kwaidan said, "From the kindness of your speech and from the very polite welcome given me by your household, I imagine that you have not always been a woodcutter. Perhaps you formerly belonged to one of the upper classes." Smiling, the woodcutter answered, "Sir, you are not mistaken. Though now living as you find me, I was once a person of some distinction. My story is the story of a ruined life, ruined by my own fault. I used to be in the service of a daimyo, and my rank in that service was not inconsiderable. But I loved women and wine too well, and under the influence of passion, I acted wickedly. My selfishness brought about the ruin of our house and caused the death of many persons. Retribution followed me, and I long remained a fugitive in the land. Now I often pray that I may be able to make some atonement for the evil which I did, and to re-establish the ancestral home. But I fear that I shall never find any way of so doing. Nevertheless, I try to overcome the karma of my errors by sincere repentance, and by helping, as far as I can, those who are unfortunate." Kwaidan was pleased by this announcement of good resolve, and he said to the Aruji, "My friend, I have had occasion to observe that men, prone to folly in their youth, may in after years become very earnest in right living. In the Holy Sutra, it is written that those strongest in wrongdoing can become, by power of good resolve, the strongest in right doing. I do not doubt that you have a good heart, and I hope that better fortune will come to you. Tonight I shall recite the sutra for your sake, and pray that you may obtain the force to overcome the karma of any past errors." With these assurances, Kwaidan bade the Aruji good night, and his host showed him to a very small side room where a bed had been made ready. Then all went to sleep except the priest, who began to read the sutras by the light of a paper lantern. Until a late hour he continued to read and pray. Then he opened a little window in his little sleeping room to take a last look at the landscape before lying down. The night was beautiful. There was no cloud in the sky. There was no wind, and the strong moonlight threw down sharp black shadows of foliage and glittered on the dews of the garden. Shrillings of crickets and bell insects, 3, made a musical tumult, and the sound of the neighboring cascade deepened with the night. Kwaidan felt thirsty as he listened to the noise of the water, and remembering the bamboo aqueduct at the rear of the house, he thought that he could go there and get a drink without disturbing the sleeping household. Very gently he pushed apart the sliding screens that separated his room from the main apartment, and he saw, by the light of the lantern, 5 recumbent bodies without heads. For one instant he stood bewildered, imagining a crime. But in another moment he perceived that there was no blood, and that the headless necks did not look as if they had been cut. Then he thought to himself, "Either this is an illusion made by goblins, or I have been lured into the dwelling of a Rokuro-Kubi." 4. In the book Soshinki Usper 5, it is written that if one find the body of a Rokuro-Kubi without its head and remove the body to another place, the head will never be able to join itself again to the neck. And the book further says that when the head comes back and finds that its body has been moved, it will strike itself upon the floor 3 times, bounding like a ball. and will pant as in great fear, and presently die. Now, if these be Rokuro-Kubi, they mean me no good, so I shall be justified in following the instructions of the book. He seized the body of the Aruji by the feet, pulled it to the window, and pushed it out. Then he went to the back door, which he found barred, and he surmised that the heads had made their exit through the smoke hole in the roof, which had been left open. Gently unbarring the door, he made his way to the garden, and proceeded with all possible caution to the grove beyond it. He heard voices talking in the grove, and he went in the direction of the voices, stealing from shadow to shadow until he reached a good hiding place. Then, from behind a trunk, he caught sight of the heads, all 5 of them, flitting about and chatting as they flitted. They were eating worms and insects which they found on the ground or among the trees. Presently the head of the Aruji stopped eating and said, "Ah, that traveling priest who came tonight. How fat all his body is. When we shall have eaten him, our bellies will be well filled. I was foolish to talk to him as I did. It only set him to reciting the sutras on behalf of my soul. To go near him while he is reciting would be difficult, and we cannot touch him so long as he is praying. But as it is now nearly morning, perhaps he has gone to sleep. Some one of you go to the house and see what the fellow is doing." Another head, the head of a young woman, immediately rose up and flitted to the house, lightly as a bat. After a few minutes it came back, and cried out huskily, in a tone of great alarm, "That traveling priest is not in the house. He is gone. But that is not the worst of the matter. He has taken the body of our Aruji, and I do not know where he has put it." At this announcement, the head of the Aruji, distinctly visible in the moonlight, assumed a frightful aspect. Its eyes opened monstrously, its hair stood up bristling, and its teeth gnashed. Then a cry burst from its lips, and weeping tears of rage, it exclaimed, "Since my body has been moved, to rejoin it is not possible. Then I must die. And all through the work of that priest. Before I die, I will get at that priest. I will tear him. I will devour him. And there he is, behind that tree, hiding behind that tree. See him? The fat coward." In the same moment, the head of the Aruji, followed by the other 4 heads, sprang at Kwaidan. But the strong priest had already armed himself by plucking up a young tree, and with that tree he struck the heads as they came, knocking them from him with tremendous blows. 4 of them fled away, but the head of the Aruji, though battered again and again, desperately continued to bound at the priest, and at last caught him by the left sleeve of his robe. Kwaidan, however, as quickly gripped the head by its topknot, and repeatedly struck it. It did not release its hold, but it uttered a long moan, and thereafter ceased to struggle. It was dead, but its teeth still held the sleeve, and for all his great strength, Kwaidan could not force open the jaws. With the head still hanging to his sleeve, he went back to the house, and there caught sight of the other 4 Rokuro-Kubi squatting together, with their bruised and bleeding heads reunited to their bodies. But when they perceived him at the back door, all screamed, "The priest! The priest!" and fled through the other doorway out into the woods. Eastward the sky was brightening. Day was about to dawn, and Kwaidan knew that the power of the goblins was limited to the hours of darkness. He looked at the head clinging to his sleeve, its face all fouled with blood and foam and clay, and he laughed aloud as he thought to himself, "What a miage! The head of a goblin!" After which he gathered together his few belongings, and leisurely descended the mountain to continue his journey. Right on he journeyed, until he came to Suwa in Shinano. 6. And into the main street of Suwa he solemnly strode, with the head dangling at his elbow. Then woman fainted, and children screamed and ran away. And there was a great crowding and clamoring until the trite, as the police in those days were called, seized the priest and took him to jail. For they supposed the head to be the head of a murdered man who, in the moment of being killed, had caught the murderer's sleeve in his teeth. As for Kwaidan, He only smiled and said nothing when they questioned him. So, after having passed a night in prison, he was brought before the magistrates of the district. Then he was ordered to explain how he, a priest, had been found with the head of a man fastened to his sleeve, and why he had dared thus shamelessly to parade his crime in the sight of people. Quario laughed long and loudly at these questions, and then he said, "Sirs, I did not fasten the head to my sleeve. It fastened itself there, much against my will, and I have not committed any crime, for this is not the head of a man. It is the head of a goblin, and if I caused the death of the goblin, I did not do so by any shedding of blood, but simply by taking the precautions necessary to assure my own safety." And he proceeded to relate the whole of the adventure, bursting into another hearty laugh as he told of his encounter with the 5 heads. But the magistrates did not laugh. They judged him to be a hardened criminal, and his story an insult to their intelligence. Therefore, without further questioning, they decided to order his immediate execution. All of them, except one, a very old man. This aged officer had made no remark during the trial, but after having heard the opinion of his colleagues, he rose up and said, "Let us first examine the head carefully, for this, I think, has not yet been done. If the priest has spoken truth, the head itself should bear witness for him. Bring the head here." So the head, still holding in its teeth the goromo that had been stripped from Quario's shoulders, was put before the judges. The old man turned it round and round, carefully examined it, and discovered, on the nape of its neck, several strange red characters. He called the attention of his colleagues to these, and also bade them observe that the edges of the neck nowhere presented the appearance of having been cut by any weapon. On the contrary, the line of leverance was smooth as the line at which a falling leaf detaches itself from the stem. Then said the elder, "I am quite sure that the priest told us nothing but the truth. This is the head of a Rokuro-Kubi." In the book Nanhoi Butsushi, it is written that certain red characters can always be found upon the nape of the neck of a real Rokuro-Kubi. There are the characters. You can see for yourselves that they have not been painted. Moreover, it is well known that such goblins have been dwelling in the mountains of the province of Kai from very ancient time. "But you, sir," he exclaimed, turning to Quario, "what sort of sturdy priest may you be? Certainly you have given proof of a courage that few priests possess, and you have the air of a soldier rather than a priest. Perhaps you once belonged to the samurai class." "You have guessed rightly, sir," Quario responded. "Before becoming a priest, I long followed the profession of arms, and in those days I never feared man or devil. My name then was Isogai Heidazaemon Taketsura of Kushu. There may be some among you who remember it." At the mention of that name, a murmur of admiration filled the courtroom, for there were many present who remembered it, and Quario immediately found himself among friends instead of judges. Friends anxious to prove their admiration by fraternal kindness. With honor they escorted him to the residence of the daimyo, who welcomed him and feasted him, and made him a handsome present before allowing him to depart. When Quario left Suwa, he was as happy as any priest is permitted to be in this transitory world. As for the head, he took it with him, jocosely insisting that he intended it for a Miyage, and now it only remains to tell what became of the head. A day or two after leaving Suwa, Quario met with a robber, who stopped him in a lonesome place and bade him strip. Quario at once removed his koromo and offered it to the robber, who then first perceived what was hanging to the sleeve. Though brave, the highwayman was startled. He dropped the garment and sprang back. Then he cried out, "You! What kind of a priest are you? Why, you are a worse man than I am. It is true that I have killed people, but I never walked about with anybody's head fastened to my sleeve." "Well, Sir Priest, I suppose we are of the same calling, and I must say that I admire you. Now that head would be of use to me. I could frighten people with it. Will you sell it?" You can have my robe in exchange for your koromo, and I will give you 5 ender score for the head." Kwaidan answered, "I shall let you have the head and the robe if you insist, but I must tell you that this is not the head of a man. It is a goblin's head. So, if you buy it and have any trouble in consequence, please to remember that you were not deceived by me." "What a nice priest you are!" exclaimed the robber. "You kill men and jest about it. But I am really in earnest. Here is my robe, and here is the money, and let me have the head." "What is the use of joking? Take the thing," said Kwaidan. "I was not joking. The only joke, if there be any joke at all, is that you are fool enough to pay good money for a goblin's head." And Kwaidan, loudly laughing, went upon his way. Thus the robber got the head and the koromo, and for some time he played goblin priest upon the highways. But, reaching the neighborhood of Suwa, he there learned the true story of the head, and he then became afraid that the spirit of the Rokuro-Kubi might give him trouble. So he made up his mind to take back the head to the place from which it had come, and to bury it with its body. He found his way to the lonely cottage in the mountains of Kai, but nobody was there, and he could not discover the body. Therefore he buried the head by itself, in the grove behind the cottage, and he had a tombstone set up over the grave, and he caused a sagaki service to be performed on behalf of the spirit of the Rokuro-Kubi. And that tombstone, known as the Tombstone of the Rokuro-Kubi, may be seen, at least so the Japanese storyteller Jiu-Roku-Zakura, Uso no Yona, Jiu-Roku-Zakura, Sake ni Kari. In Wakagori, a district of the province of Iyo 1, there is a very ancient and famous cherry tree called Jiu-Roku-Zakura, or the cherry tree of the 16th day, because it blooms every year upon the 16th day of the first month by the old lunar calendar, and only upon that day. Thus, the time of its flowering is the period of great cold, though the natural habit of a cherry tree is to wait for the spring season before venturing to blossom. But the Jiu-Roku-Zakura blossoms with a life that is not, or at least that was not originally, its own. There is the ghost of a man in that tree. He was a samurai of Iyo, and the tree grew in his garden, and it used to flower at the usual time, that is to say, about the end of March or the beginning of April. He had played under that tree when he was a child, and his parents and grandparents and ancestors had hung to its blossoming branches, season after season for more than 100 years, bright strips of colored paper inscribed with poems of praise. He himself became very old, outliving all his children, and there was nothing in the world left for him to love except that tree. And lo, in the summer of a certain year, the tree withered and died. Exceedingly the old man sorrowed for his tree. Then kind neighbors found for him a young and beautiful cherry tree and planted it in his garden, hoping thus to comfort him. And he thanked them and pretended to be glad. But really his heart was full of pain, for he had loved the old tree so well that nothing could have consoled him for the loss of it. At last there came to him a happy thought. He remembered a way by which the perishing tree might be saved. It was the 16th day of the first month. Along he went into his garden, and bowed down before the withered tree, and spoke to it, saying, "Now deign, I beseech you, once more to bloom, because I am going to die in your stead." For it is believed that one can really give away one's life to another person, or to a creature, or even to a tree, by the favor of the gods. And thus to transfer one's life is expressed by the term migawari ni tatsu, to act as a substitute. Then under that tree he spread a white cloth and divers coverings, and sat down upon the coverings, and performed harakiri after the fashion of a samurai. And the ghost of him went into the tree and made it blossom in that same hour. And every year it still blooms on the 16th day of the first month, in the season of More than 700 years ago, at Dan no Ura, in the Straits of Shimonoseki, was fought the last battle of the long contest between the Heike, or Taira clan, and the Genji, or Minamoto clan. There, the Heike perished utterly, with their women and children, and their infant emperor likewise, now remembered as Antoku Tenno. And that sea and shore have been haunted for 700 years. Elsewhere, I told you about the strange crabs found there, called Heike crabs, which have human faces on their backs, and are said to be the spirits of the Heike warriors. But there are many strange things to be seen and heard along that coast. On dark nights, thousands of ghostly fires hover about the beach, or flit above the waves. Pale lights, which the fishermen call onibi, or demon fires. And whenever the winds are up, a sound of great shouting comes from that sea, like a clamor of battle. In former years, the Heike were much more restless than they now are. They would rise about ships passing in the night and try to sink them, and at all times they would watch for swimmers to pull them down. It was in order to appease those dead that the Buddhist temple, Amidaji, was built at Akamagaseki. A cemetery also was made close by, near the beach, and within it were set up monuments inscribed with the names of the drowned emperor and of his great vassals, and Buddhist services were regularly performed there on behalf of the spirits of them. After the temple had been built and the tombs erected, the Heike gave less trouble than before, but they continued to do queer things at intervals, proving that they had not found the perfect peace. Some centuries ago, there lived at Akamagaseki a blind man named Hoichi, who was famed for his skill in recitation and in playing upon the biwa. From childhood, he had been trained to recite and to play, and while yet a lad, he had surpassed his teachers. As a professional biwa hoshi, he became famous chiefly by his recitations of the history of the Heike and the Genji, and it is said that when he sang the song of the Battle of Dan no Ura, even the goblins, the Kijin, could not refrain from tears. At the outset of his career, Hoichi was very poor, but he found a good friend to help him. The priest of the Amidaji was fond of poetry and music, and he often invited Hoichi to the temple to play and recite. Afterwards, being much impressed by the wonderful skill of the lad, the priest proposed that Hoichi should make the temple his home, and this offer was gratefully accepted. Hoichi was given a room in the temple building, and in return for food and lodging, he was required only to gratify the priest with a musical performance on certain evenings when otherwise disengaged. One summer night, the priest was called away to perform a Buddhist service at the house of a dead parishioner, and he went there with his acolyte, leaving Hoichi alone in the temple. It was a hot night, and the blind man sought to cool himself on the veranda before his sleeping room. The veranda overlooked a small garden in the rear of the Amidaji. There Hoichi waited for the priest's return and tried to relieve his solitude by practicing upon his biwa. Midnight passed, and the priest did not appear, but the atmosphere was still too warm for comfort within doors, and Hoichi remained outside. At last, he heard steps approaching from the back gate. Somebody crossed the garden, advanced to the veranda, and halted directly in front of him. But it was not the priest. A deep voice called the blind man's name, abruptly and unceremoniously, in the manner of a samurai summoning an inferior. Hoichi. Hoichi was too much startled for the moment to respond, and the voice called again in a tone of harsh command. Hoichi. "Hi," answered the blind man, frightened by the menace in the voice. "I am blind. I cannot know who calls." "There is nothing to fear," the stranger exclaimed, speaking more gently. "I am stopping near this temple and have been sent to you with a message. My present lord, a person of exceedingly high rank, is now staying in Akamagaseki with many noble attendants. He wished to view the scene of the Battle of Dan no Ura, and today he visited that place. Having heard of your skill in reciting the story of the battle, he now desires to hear your performance, so you will take your biwa and come with me at once to the house where the august assembly is waiting. In those times, the order of a samurai was not to be lightly disobeyed. Hoichi donned his sandals, took his biwa, and went away with the stranger, who guided him deftly, but obliged him to walk very fast. The hand that guided was iron, and the clank of the warrior's stride proved him fully armed, probably some palace guard on duty. Hoichi's first alarm was over. He began to imagine himself in good luck, for, remembering the retainer's assurance about a person of exceedingly high rank, he thought that the lord who wished to hear the recitation could not be less than a daimyo of the first class. Presently, the samurai halted, and Hoichi became aware that they had arrived at a large gateway, and he wondered, for he could not remember any large gate in that part of the town except the main gate of the Amidaji. "Kaimon," the samurai called, and there was a sound of unbarring, and the twain passed on. They traversed a space of garden and halted again before some entrance. The retainer cried in a loud voice, "Within there, I have brought Hoichi." Then came sounds of feet hurrying and screens sliding and rain doors opening and voices of women in converse. By the language of the women, Hoichi knew them to be domestics in some noble household, but he could not imagine to what place he had been conducted. After he had been helped to mount several stone steps, a woman's hand guided him along interminable reaches of polished planking and round pillared angles too many to remember, and over widths amazing of matted floor, into the middle of some vast apartment. There he thought that many great people were assembled. The sound of the rustling of silk was like the sound of leaves in a forest. He heard also a great humming of voices, talking in undertones, and the speech was the speech of courts. Hoichi was told to put himself at ease, and he found a kneeling cushion ready for him. After having taken his place upon it and tuned his instrument, the voice of a woman, whom he divined to be the rojo, or matron in charge of the female service, addressed him. "It is now required that the history of the Heike be recited to the accompaniment of the biwa." Now the entire recital would have required a time of many nights. Therefore, Hoichi ventured a question. "As the whole of the story is not soon told, what portion is it augustly desired that I now recite?" The woman's voice made answer, "Recite the story of the battle at Dan no Wura, for the pity of it is the most deep." Then Hoichi lifted up his voice and chanted the chant of the fight on the bitter sea, wonderfully making his biwa to sound like the straining of oars and the rushing of ships, the whir and the hissing of arrows, the shouting and trampling of men, the crashing of steel upon helmets, the plunging of slain in the flood. And to left and right of him, in the pauses of his playing, he could hear voices murmuring praise. How marvelous an artist! Never in our own province was playing heard like this. Not in all the empire is there another singer like Hoichi. Then fresh courage came to him, and he played and sang yet better than before, and a hush of wonder deepened about him. But when at last he came to tell the fate of the fair and helpless, the piteous perishing of the women and children, and the death leap of Nino Ama, with the imperial infant in her arms, then all the listeners uttered together one long, shuddering cry of anguish, and thereafter they wept and wailed so loudly and so wildly that the blind man was frightened by the violence of grief that he had made. For much time the sobbing and the wailing continued, but gradually the sounds of lamentation died away, and again, in the great stillness that followed, Hoichi heard the voice of the woman whom he supposed to be the rojo. She said, "Although we had been assured that you were a very skillful player upon the biwa, and without an equal in recitative, we did not know that anyone could be so skillful as you have proved yourself tonight. Our Lord has been pleased to say that he intends to bestow upon you a fitting reward, but he desires that you shall perform before him once every night for the next 6 nights, after which time he will probably make his August return journey. There is another matter about which I have been ordered to inform you. It is required that you shall speak to no one of your visits here, during the time of our Lord's August sojourn at Akamagasaki. As he is traveling incognito, he commands that no mention of these things be made. You are now free to go back to your temple." After Hoiki had duly expressed his thanks, a woman's hand conducted him to the entrance of the house, where the same retainer was waiting to take him home. The retainer led him to the veranda at the rear of the temple, and there bade him farewell. It was almost dawn when Hoiki returned, but his absence from the temple had not been observed, as the priest, coming back at a very late hour, had supposed him asleep. During the day, Hoiki was able to take some rest, and he said nothing about his strange adventure. In the middle of the following night, the samurai again came for him and led him to the August assembly, where he gave another recitation with the same success. But during this second visit, his absence from the temple was accidentally discovered, and after his return in the morning, he was summoned to the presence of the priest, who said to him, in a tone of kindly reproach, "We have been very anxious about you, friend Hoiki. To go out, blind and alone, at so late an hour is dangerous. Why did you go without telling us? I could have ordered a servant to accompany you. And where have you been?" Hoiki answered, evasively. "Pardon me, kind friend. I had to attend to some private business, and I could not arrange the matter at any other hour." The priest was surprised, rather than pained, by Hoiki's reticence. He felt it to be unnatural, and suspected something wrong. He feared that the blind lad had been bewitched or deluded by some evil spirits. He did not ask any more questions, but he privately instructed the men servants of the temple to keep watch upon Hoiki's movements and to follow him in case that he should again leave the temple after dark. On the very next night, Hoiki was seen to leave the temple, and the servants immediately lighted their lanterns and followed after him. But it was a rainy night and very dark. Before the temple folks could get to the roadway, Hoiki had disappeared. Evidently, he had walked very fast, a strange thing, considering his blindness, for the road was in a bad condition. The men hurried through the streets, making inquiries at every house which Hoiki was accustomed to visit, but nobody could give them any news of him. At last, as they were returning to the temple by way of the shore, they were startled by the sound of a biwa, furiously played, in the cemetery of the Amidaji, except for some ghostly fires, such as usually flitted there on dark nights. All was blackness in that direction. But the men at once hastened to the cemetery, and there, by the help of their lanterns, they discovered Hoiki, sitting alone in the rain before the memorial tomb of Entoku Tenno, making his biwa resound, and loudly chanting the chant of the Battle of Dan Nowura, and behind him, and about him, and everywhere above the tombs, the fires of the dead were burning like candles. Never before had so great a host of Onibi appeared in the sight of mortal man. "Hoiki-san! Hoiki-san!" the servants cried. "You are bewitched! Hoiki-san!" But the blind man did not seem to hear. Strenuously he made his biwa to rattle and ring and clang. More and more wildly he chanted the chant of the Battle of Dan Nowura. They caught hold of him. They shouted into his ear, "Hoiki-san! Hoiki-san! Come home with us at once!" Reprovingly he spoke to them. "To interrupt me in such a manner before this august assembly will not be tolerated." Whereat, in spite of the weirdness of the thing, the servants could not help laughing. Sure that he had been bewitched, they now seized him and pulled him up on his feet, and by main force hurried him back to the temple, where he was immediately relieved of his wet clothes by order of the priest. Then the priest insisted upon a full explanation of his friend's astonishing behavior. Hoiki long hesitated to speak, but at last, finding that his conduct had really alarmed and angered the good priest, he decided to abandon his reserve, and he related everything that had happened from the time of the first visit of the samurai. The priest said, "Hoiki, my poor friend, you are now in great danger. How unfortunate that you did not tell me all this before. Your wonderful skill in music has indeed brought you into strange trouble. By this time you must be aware that you have not been visiting any house whatever, but have been passing your nights in the cemetery among the tombs of the Heike, and it was before the memorial tomb of Antoku Tenno that our people tonight found you, sitting in the rain. All that you have been imagining was illusion, except the calling of the dead. By once obeying them, you have put yourself in their power. If you obey them again, after what has already occurred, they will tear you in pieces, but they would have destroyed you sooner or later in any event. Now I shall not be able to remain with you tonight. I am called away to perform another service, but before I go, it will be necessary to protect your body by writing holy texts upon it. Before sundown, the priest and his acolyte stripped Hoichi. Then, with their writing brushes, they traced upon his breast and back, head and face and neck, limbs and hands and feet, even upon the soles of his feet, and upon all parts of his body, the text of the Holy Sutra called Hanya Shinkyo. When this had been done, the priest instructed Hoichi, saying, "Tonight, as soon as I go away, you must seat yourself on the veranda and wait. You will be called, but whatever may happen, do not answer, and do not move. Say nothing and sit still, as if meditating. If you stir or make any noise, you will be torn asunder. Do not get frightened, and do not think of calling for help, because no help could save you. If you do exactly as I tell you, the danger will pass, and you will have nothing more to fear." After dark, the priest and the acolyte went away, and Hoichi seated himself on the veranda, according to the instructions given him. He laid his biwa on the planking beside him, and assuming the attitude of meditation, remained quite still, taking care not to cough or to breathe audibly. For hours he stayed thus. Then, from the roadway, he heard the steps coming. They passed the gate, crossed the garden, approached the veranda, stopped directly in front of him. "Hoichi!" the deep voice called. But the blind man held his breath and sat motionless. "Hoichi!" grimly called the voice a second time. Then a third time, savagely. "Hoichi!" Hoichi remained as still as a stone, and the voice grumbled. "No answer. That won't do. Must see where the fellow is." There was a noise of heavy feet mounting upon the veranda. The feet approached deliberately, halted beside him. Then, for long minutes, during which Hoichi felt his whole body shake to the beating of his heart, there was dead silence. At last, the gruff voice muttered close to him, "Here is the biwa, but of the biwa player I see, only 2 ears." So that explains why he did not answer. He had no mouth to answer with. There is nothing left of him but his ears. Now to my lord those ears I will take, in proof that the august commands have been obeyed, so far as was possible. At that instant, Hoichi felt his ears seized by fingers of iron and wrenched away. Great as the pain was, he gave no cry. The heavy footfalls receded along the veranda, descended into the garden, passed out to the roadway, ceased. From either side of his head, the blind man felt a thick, warm trickling, but he dared not lift his hands. Before sunrise, the priest came back. He hastened at once to the veranda in the rear, stepped and slipped upon something clammy, and uttered a cry of horror, for he saw, by the light of his lantern, that the clamminess was blood. But he perceived Hoichi sitting there, in the attitude of meditation, with the blood still oozing from his wounds. "My poor Hoichi!" cried the startled priest. "What is this? You have been hurt?" At the sound of his friend's voice, the blind man felt safe. He burst out sobbing, and tearfully told his adventure of the night. "Poor, poor Hoichi!" the priest exclaimed. "All my fault. My very grievous fault. Everywhere upon your body the holy texts had been written, except upon your ears. I trusted my acolyte to do that part of the work, and it was very, very wrong of me not to have made sure that he had done it. Well, the matter cannot now be helped. We can only try to heal your hurts as soon as possible. Cheer up, friend. The danger is now well over. You will never again be troubled by those visitors." With the aid of a good doctor, Hoichi soon recovered from his injuries. The story of his strange adventure spread far and wide and soon made him famous. Many noble persons went to Akamagasaki to hear him recite, and large presents of money were given to him, so that he became a wealthy man. But from the time of his adventure, he was known only by the appellation. On the Akasaka Road in Tokyo, there is a slope called Ki no Kunizaka, which means the slope of the province of Ki. On one side of this slope, you see an ancient moat, deep and very wide, with high green banks rising up to some place of gardens. On the other side of the road extend the long and lofty walls of an imperial palace. Before the era of street lamps and jinrikishas, this neighborhood was very lonesome after dark. Belated pedestrians would go miles out of their way rather than mount the Ki no Kunizaka alone after sunset, all because of a Mujina that used to walk there. The last man who saw the Mujina was an old merchant of the Kyobashi quarter who died about 30 years ago. This is the story, as he told it. One night, at a late hour, he was hurrying up the Ki no Kunizaka when he perceived a woman crouching by the moat, all alone and weeping bitterly. Fearing that she intended to drown herself, he stopped to offer her any assistance or consolation in his power. She appeared to be a slight and graceful person, handsomely dressed, and her hair was arranged like that of a young girl of good family. "Oh, Jaku," he exclaimed, approaching her. "Oh, Jaku, do not cry like that. Tell me what the trouble is, and if there be any way to help you, I shall be glad to help you." He really meant what he said, for he was a very kind man. But she continued to weep, hiding her face from him with one of her long sleeves. "Oh, Jaku," he said again, as gently as he could. "Please, please listen to me. This is no place for a young lady at night. Do not cry, I implore you. Only tell me how I may be of some help to you." Slowly she rose up, but turned her back to him and continued to moan and sob behind her sleeve. He laid his hand lightly upon her shoulder and pleaded, "Oh, Jachu, oh, Jachu, oh, Jachu, listen to me, just for one little moment." Then that Ojachu turned around and dropped her sleeve and stroked her face with her hand. And the man saw that she had no eyes or nose or mouth, and he screamed and ran away. Up Ki no Kunizaka he ran, and all was black and empty before him. On and on he ran, never daring to look back, and at last he saw a lantern so far away that it looked like the gleam of a firefly, and he made for it. It proved to be only the lantern of an itinerant soba seller who had set down his stand by the roadside. But any light and any human companionship was good after that experience. He flung himself down at the feet of the soba seller, crying out, "Ah! Ah! 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 Ah!" "Kore! Kore!" roughly exclaimed the soba man. "Here, what is the matter with you? Anybody hurt you?" "No, nobody hurt me," panted the other. Only only scared you?" queried the peddler, unsympathetically. "Robbers? Not robbers, not robbers," gasped the terrified man. I saw a woman by the moat, and she showed me. I cannot tell you what she showed me." "Hey, was it anything like this that she showed you?" cried the soba man, stroking his own face, which therewith became like unto an egg, and simultaneously the Sympathy of Benten. The original story is in the Otogi Hyaku Monogatari, but in Kyoto, there is a famous temple called Amadera. Sadazumi Shino, the fifth son of the Emperor Seiwa, passed the greater part of his life there as a priest, and the graves of many celebrated persons are to be seen in the temple grounds. But the present edifice is not the ancient Amadera. The original temple, after the lapse of 10 centuries, fell into such decay that it had to be entirely rebuilt in the 14th year of Jiu-Roku, 1701 AD. A great festival was held to celebrate the rebuilding of the Amadera, and among the thousands of persons who attended that festival, there was a young scholar and poet named Hanagaki Baishu. He wandered about the newly laid out grounds and gardens, delighted by all that he saw, until he reached the place of a spring at which he had often drunk in former times. He was then surprised to find that the soil about the spring had been dug away so as to form a square pond, and that at one corner of this pond there had been set up a wooden tablet bearing the words Tanjo Sui, birth water. He also saw that a small but very handsome temple of the goddess Benten had been erected beside the pond. While he was looking at this new temple, a sudden gust of wind blew to his feet Tanzaku, on which the following poem had been written: Shirushi Areto, Iwaizo Samaru, Tamahoki, Torut Bakari, no, Shigiri Naretomon. The word Kanjo, birth, should here be understood in its mystical Buddhist meaning of new life or rebirth, rather than in the Western signification of birth. Tanzaku is the name given to the long strips or ribbons of paper, usually colored, upon which poems are written perpendicularly. Poems written upon Tanzaku are suspended to trees and flower, to wind bells, to any beautiful object in which the poet has found an inspiration. This poem, a poem on first love, Hatsukoi, composed by the famous Shunrei Kyo, was not unfamiliar to him, but it had been written upon the Tanzaku by a female hand, and so exquisitely that he could scarcely believe his eyes. Something in the form of the characters, an indefinite grace, suggested that period of youth between childhood and womanhood, and the pure, rich color of the ink seemed to bespeak the purity and goodness of the writer's heart. It is difficult for the inexperienced European eye to distinguish in Chinese or Japanese writing those characteristics implied by our term hand, in the sense of individual style, but the Japanese scholar never forgets the peculiarities of a handwriting once seen, and he can even guess at the approximate age of the writer. Chinese and Japanese authors claim that the color, quality of the ink used tells something of the character of the writer. As every person grounds or prepares his or her own ink, the deeper and clearer black would at least indicate something of personal carefulness and of the sense of beauty. Baishu carefully folded up the cord Tanzaku and took it home with him. When he looked at it again, the writing appeared to him even more wonderful than at first. His knowledge in calligraphy assured him only that the poem had been written by some girl who was very young, very intelligent, and probably very gentle-hearted. But this assurance sufficed to shape within his mind the image of a very charming person, and he soon found himself in love with the unknown. Then his first resolve was to seek out the writer of the verses and, if possible, make her his wife. Yet how was he to find her? Who was she? Where did she live? Certainly he could hope to find her only through the favor of the gods, but presently it occurred to him that the gods might be very willing to lend their aid. The Karnenzaku had come to him while he was standing in front of the temple of Benten-sama, and it was to this divinity in particular that lovers were wont to pray for happy union. This reflection impelled him to beseech the goddess for assistance. He went at once to the temple of Benten of the Birth Water, Tanjo Sui no Benten, in the grounds of the Amadera, and there, with all the fervor of his heart, he made his petition. O goddess, pity me. Help me to find where the young person lives who wrote the Kurtenzaku. Vouchsafe me but one chance to meet her, even if only for a moment. And after having made this prayer, he began to perform a 7 days religious service, Nanuka Mari, in honor of the goddess. vowing at the same time to pass the 7th night in ceaseless worship before her shrine. There are many kinds of religious exercises called Meri. The performer of a Nanuka Mairi Dunscore pledges himself to pray at a certain temple every day for 7 days in succession. Now on the 7th night, the night of his vigil, during the hour when the silence is most deep, he heard at the main gateway of the temple grounds a voice calling for admittance. Another voice from within answered. The gate was opened, and Baishu saw an old man of majestic appearance approaching with slow steps. This venerable person was clad in robes of ceremony, and he wore upon his snow-white head a black cap, iboshi, of the form indicating high rank. Reaching the little temple of Benten, he knelt down in front of it, as if respectfully awaiting some order. Then the outer door of the temple was opened. The hanging curtain of bamboo behind it, concealing the inner sanctuary, was rolled halfway up, and a Chigo came forward, a beautiful boy with long hair tied back in the ancient manner. He stood at the threshold and said to the old man in a clear, loud voice. The term Chigo usually means the page of a noble household, especially an imperial page. The Arshigo who appears in this story is of course a supernatural being, the court messenger of the goddess and her mouthpiece. There is a person here who has been praying for a love union not suitable to his present condition and otherwise difficult to bring about. But as the young man is worthy of our pity, you have been called to see whether something can be done for him. If there should prove to be any relation between the parties from the period of a former birth, you will introduce them to each other. On receiving this command, the old man bowed respectfully to the Chigo. Then, rising, he drew from the pocket of his long left sleeve a crimson cord. One end of this cord he passed round Baishu's body, as if to bind him with it. The other end he put into the flame of one of the temple lamps, and while the cord was there burning, he waved his hand 3 times, as if to summon somebody out of the dark. Immediately, in the direction of the Amadera, a sound of coming steps was heard, and in another moment a girl appeared, a charming girl, 15 or 16 years old. She approached gracefully, but very shyly, hiding the lower part of her face with a fan, and she knelt down beside Baishu. The score Chigo then said to Baishu, "Recently you have been suffering much heart pain, and this desperate love of yours has even impaired your health. We could not allow you to remain in so unhappy a condition, and we therefore summoned the old man under the moon to make you acquainted with the writer of that Tanzaku. She is now beside you." Gekawal. This is a poetical appellation for the god of marriage, more usually known as Kor Musubi no Kami. Throughout this story, there is an interesting mingling of Shinto and Buddhist ideas. With these words, the Chigo retired behind the bamboo curtain. Then the old man went away as he had come, and the young girl followed him. Simultaneously, Baishu heard the great bell of the Amadera sounding the hour of dawn. He prostrated himself in thanksgiving before the shrine of Benten of the Birthwater and proceeded homeward, feeling as if awakened from some delightful dream, happy at having seen the charming person whom he had so fervently prayed to meet. Unhappy also because of the fear that he might never meet her again. But scarcely had he passed from the gateway into the street when he saw a young girl walking alone in the same direction that he was going, and even in the dusk of the dawn, he recognized her at once as the person to whom he had been introduced before the temple of Benten. As he quickened his pace to overtake her, she turned and saluted him with a graceful bow. Then for the first time he ventured to speak to her, and she answered him in a voice of which the sweetness filled his heart with joy. Through the yet silent streets they walked on, chatting happily, till they found themselves before the house where Baishu lived. There he paused, spoke to the girl of his hopes and fears. Smiling, she asked, "Do you not know that I was sent for to become your wife?" And she entered with him. Becoming his wife, she delighted him beyond expectation by the charm of her mind and heart. Moreover, he found her to be much more accomplished than he had supposed. Besides being able to write so wonderfully, she could paint beautiful pictures. She knew the art of arranging flowers, the art of embroidery, the art of music. She could weave and sew, and she knew everything in regard to the management of a house. It was in the early autumn that the young people had met, and they lived together in perfect accord until the winter season began. Nothing during those months occurred to disturb their peace. Baishu's love for his gentle wife only strengthened with the passing of time. Yet, strangely enough, he remained ignorant of her history, knew nothing about her family. Of such matters she had never spoken, and as the gods had given her to him, he imagined that it would not be proper to question her. But neither the old man under the moon nor anyone else came, as he had feared, to take her away. Nobody even made any inquiries about her, and the neighbors, for some undiscoverable reason, acted as if totally unaware of her presence. Baishu wondered at all this, but stranger experiences were awaiting him. One winter morning he happened to be passing through a somewhat remote quarter of the city when he heard himself loudly called by name and saw a manservant making signs to him from the gateway of a private residence. As Baishu did not know the man's face and did not have a single acquaintance in that part of Kyoto, he was more than startled by so abrupt a summons. But the servant, coming forward, saluted him with the utmost respect and said, "My master greatly desires the honor of speaking with you. Deign to enter for a moment." After an instant of hesitation, Baishu allowed himself to be conducted to the house. A dignified and richly dressed person, who seemed to be the master, welcomed him at the entrance and led him to the guest room. When the courtesies due upon a first meeting had been fully exchanged, the host apologized for the informal manner of his invitation and said, "It must have seemed to you very rude of us to call you in such a way. But perhaps you will pardon our impoliteness when I tell you that we acted thus upon what I firmly believe to have been an inspiration from the goddess Benten. Now, permit me to explain. I have a daughter about 16 years old, who can write rather well and do other things in the common way. She has the ordinary nature of woman. As we were anxious to make her happy by finding a good husband for her, we prayed the goddess Benten to help us, and we sent to every temple of Benten in the city a tanzaku written by the girl. Some nights later, the goddess appeared to me in a dream and said, 'We have heard your prayer and have already introduced your daughter to the person who is to become her husband. During the coming winter, he will visit you.' As I did not understand this assurance that a presentation had been made, I felt some doubt. I thought that the dream might have been only a common dream, signifying nothing. But last night again, I saw Benten-sama in a dream, and she said to me, 'Tomorrow the young man, of whom I once spoke to you, will come to this street. Then you can call him into your house and ask him to become the husband of your daughter. He is a good young man, and later in life he will obtain a much higher rank than he now holds.' Then Benten-sama told me your name, your age, your birthplace, and described your features and dress so exactly that my servant found no difficulty in recognizing you by the indications which I was able to give him. As it is the old Japanese rule that parents should speak depreciatingly of their children's accomplishments, the phrase 'rather well' in this connection would mean, for the visitor, wonderfully well. For the same reason, the expressions 'common way' and 'ordinary nature', as subsequently used, would imply almost the reverse of the literal meaning. This explanation bewildered Baishu instead of reassuring him, and his only reply was a formal return of thanks for the honor which the master of the house had spoken of doing him. But when the host invited him to another room for the purpose of presenting him to the young lady, his embarrassment became extreme, yet he could not reasonably decline the introduction. He could not bring himself, under such extraordinary circumstances, to announce that he already had a wife given to him by the goddess Benten herself. a wife from whom he could not even think of separating. So, in silence and trepidation, he followed his host to the apartment indicated. Then what was his amazement to discover, when presented to the daughter of the house, that she was the very same person whom he had already taken to wife. The same, yet not the same. She to whom he had been introduced by the old man under the moon was only the soul of the beloved. She to whom he was now to be wedded in her father's house was the body. Benten had wrought this miracle for the sake of her worshippers. The original story breaks off suddenly at this point, leaving several matters unexplained. The ending is rather unsatisfactory. One would like to know something about the mental experiences of the real maiden during the married life of her phantom. One would also like to know what became of the phantom, whether it continued to lead an independent existence, whether it waited patiently for the return of its husband, whether it paid a visit to the real bride. And the book says nothing about these things. But a Japanese friend explains the miracle thus. The spirit bride was really formed out of the Kortanzaku, so it is possible that the real girl did not know anything about the meeting at the temple of Benten. When she wrote those beautiful characters upon the kanzaku, something of her spirit passed into them. Therefore, it was possible to avoid In the Toyama district of the province of Bishu, there formerly lived a young farmer and his wife. Their farm was situated in a lonely place, among the hills. One night, the wife dreamed that her father-in-law, who had died some years before, came to her and said, "Tomorrow I shall be in great danger. Try to save me if you can." In the morning, she told this to her husband, and they talked about the dream. Both imagined that the dead man wanted something, but neither could imagine what the words of the vision signified. After breakfast, the husband went to the fields, but the wife remained at her loom. Presently, she was startled by a great shouting outside. She went to the door and saw the Jido of the district, with a hunting party, approaching the farm. While she stood watching them, a pheasant ran by her into the house, and she suddenly remembered her dream. "Perhaps it is my father-in-law," she thought to herself. "I must try to save it." Then, hurrying in after the bird, a fine male pheasant, she caught it without any difficulty, put it into the empty rice pot, and covered the pot with the lid. A moment later, some of the Jido's followers entered and asked her whether she had seen a pheasant. She answered boldly that she had not, but one of the hunters declared that he had seen the bird run into the house. So the party searched for it, peeping into every nook and corner, but nobody thought of looking into the rice pot. After looking everywhere else to no purpose, the men decided that the bird must have escaped through some hole, and they went away. When the farmer came home, his wife told him about the pheasant, which she had left in the rice pot, so that he might see it. "When I caught it," she said, "it did not struggle in the least, and it remained very quiet in the pot. I really think that it is father-in-law." The farmer went to the pot, lifted the lid, and took out the bird. It remained still in his hands, as if tame, and looked at him as if accustomed to his presence. One of its eyes was blind. "Father was blind of one eye," the farmer said, "the right eye, and the right eye of this bird is blind. Really, I think it is father. See, it looks at us just as father used to do." Poor father must have thought to himself, "Now that I am a bird, better to give my body to my children for food than to let the hunters have it. And that explains your dream of last night," he added, turning to his wife with an evil smile as he wrung the pheasant's neck. At the sight of that brutal act, the woman screamed and cried out, "Oh, you wicked man! Oh, you devil! Only a man with the heart of a devil could do what you have done, and I would rather die than continue to be the wife of such a man." And she sprang to the door without waiting even to put on her sandals. He caught her sleeve as she leaped, but she broke away from him and ran out, sobbing as she ran, and she ceased not to run, barefooted, till she reached the town, when she hastened directly to the residence of the Jito. Then, with many tears, she told the Jito everything. Her dream of the night before the hunting, and how she had hidden the pheasant in order to save it, and how her husband had mocked her and had killed it. The Jito spoke to her kindly and gave orders that she should be well cared for, but he commanded his officers to seize her husband. Next day, the farmer was brought up for judgment, and after he had been made to confess the truth concerning the killing of the pheasant, sentence was pronounced. The Jito said to him, "Only a person of evil heart could have acted as you have acted. In the presence of so perverse a being is a misfortune to the community in which he happens to reside. The people under our jurisdiction are people who respect the sentiment of filial piety, and among them you cannot be suffered to live." So the farmer was banished from the district and forbidden ever to return to it on pain of death. But to the woman, the Jito made a donation of land, and at a later time he caused her to be provided with a good husband. Footnote 1. The lord of the district, who acted both as governor and The Story of Chūgorō. A long time ago there lived in the Kuishikawa quarter of Yedo a hatamoto named Suzuki, whose yashiki was situated on the bank of the Yedogawa, not far from the bridge called Nakanohashi. And among the retainers of this Suzuki there was an oshigaru named Chūgorō. Chūgorō was a handsome lad, very amiable and clever, and much liked by his comrades. For several years, Chūgorō remained in the service of Suzuki, conducting himself so well that no fault was found with him. But at last, the other Kora discovered that Chūgorō was in the habit of leaving the yashiki every night by way of the garden and staying out until a little before dawn. At first, they said nothing to him about this strange behavior, for his absences did not interfere with any regular duty and were supposed to be caused by some love affair. But after a time, he began to look pale and weak, and his comrades, suspecting some serious folly, decided to interfere. Therefore, one evening, just as he was about to steal away from the house, an elderly retainer called him aside and said, "Chūgorō, my lad, we know that you go out every night and stay away until early morning, and we have observed that you are looking unwell. We fear that you are keeping bad company and injuring your health, and unless you can give a good reason for your conduct, we shall think that it is our duty to report this matter to the chief officer. In any case, since we are your comrades and friends, it is but right that we should know why you go out at night, contrary to the custom of this house." Chūgorō appeared to be very much embarrassed and alarmed by these words, but after a short silence he passed into the garden, followed by his comrade. When the two found themselves well out of hearing of the rest, Chūgorō stopped and said, "I will now tell you everything, but I must entreat you to keep my secret. If you repeat what I tell you, some great misfortune may befall me. It was in the early part of last spring, about 5 months ago, that I first began to go out at night on account of a love affair. One evening, when I was returning to the yashiki after a visit to my parents, I saw a woman standing by the riverside, not far from the main gateway. She was dressed like a person of high rank, and I thought it strange that a woman so finely dressed should be standing there alone at such an hour. But I did not think that I had any right to question her, and I was about to pass her by without speaking when she stepped forward and pulled me by the sleeve. Then I saw that she was very young and handsome. 'Will you not walk with me as far as the bridge?' she said. 'I have something to tell you.' Her voice was very soft and pleasant, and she smiled as she spoke, and her smile was hard to resist. So I walked with her toward the bridge, and on the way she told me that she had often seen me going in and out of the yashiki and had taken a fancy to me. 'I wish to have you for my husband,' she said. 'If you can like me, we shall be able to make each other very happy.' I did not know how to answer her, but I thought her very charming. As we neared the bridge, she pulled my sleeve again and led me down the bank to the very edge of the river. "Come in with me," she whispered, and pulled me toward the water. "It is deep there, as you know," and I became all at once afraid of her and tried to turn back. She smiled and caught me by the wrist and said, "Oh, you must never be afraid with me." And somehow, at the touch of her hand, I became more helpless than a child. I felt like a person in a dream who tries to run and cannot move hand or foot. Into the deep water she stepped and drew me with her, and I neither saw nor heard nor felt anything more until I found myself walking beside her through what seemed to be a great palace full of light. I was neither wet nor cold. Everything around me was dry and warm and beautiful. I could not understand where I was, nor how I had come there. The woman led me by the hand. We passed through room after room, through ever so many rooms, all empty but very fine, until we entered into a guest room of 1,000 mats. Before a great alcove, at the farther end, lights were burning and cushions laid as for a feast. But I saw no guests. She led me to the place of honor by the alcove and seated herself in front of me and said, "This is my home. Do you think that you could be happy with me here?" As she asked the question, she smiled, and I thought that her smile was more beautiful than anything else in the world. And out of my heart, I answered, "Yes." In the same moment, I remembered the story of Urashima, and I imagined that she might be the daughter of a god, but I feared to ask her any questions. Presently, maidservants came in, bearing rice wine and many dishes, which they set before us. Then she who sat before me said, "Tonight shall be our bridal night, because you like me, and this is our wedding feast." We pledged ourselves to each other for the time of 7 existences, and after the banquet, we were conducted to a bridal chamber, which had been prepared for us. It was yet early in the morning when she awoke me and said, "My dear one, you are now indeed my husband, but for reasons which I cannot tell you and which you must not ask, it is necessary that our marriage remain secret. To keep you here until daybreak would cost both of us our lives. Therefore do not, I beg of you, feel displeased because I must now send you back to the house of your lord. You can come to me tonight again, and every night hereafter at the same hour that we first met. Wait always for me by the bridge, and you will not have to wait long. But remember, above all things, that our marriage must be a secret, and that, if you talk about it, we shall probably be separated forever." I promised to obey her in all things, remembering the fate of Urashima, and she conducted me through many rooms, all empty and beautiful, to the entrance. There she again took me by the wrist, and everything suddenly became dark, and I knew nothing more until I found myself standing alone on the riverbank, close to the Nakanohashi. When I got back to the yashiki, the temple bells had not yet begun to ring. In the evening, I went again to the bridge at the hour she had named, and I found her waiting for me. She took me with her as before into the deep water and into the wonderful place where we had passed our bridal night. And every night since then, I have met and parted from her in the same way. Tonight she will certainly be waiting for me, and I would rather die than disappoint her. Therefore, I must go. But let me again entreat you, my friend, never to speak to anyone about what I have told you." The elder Ashigaru was surprised and alarmed by this story. He felt that Chūgorō had told him the truth, and the truth suggested unpleasant possibilities. Probably the whole experience was an illusion, and an illusion produced by some evil power for a malevolent end. Nevertheless, if really bewitched, the lad was rather to be pitied than blamed, and any forcible interference would be likely to result in mischief. So the Ashigaru answered kindly, "I shall never speak of what you have told me, never at least while you remain alive and well. Go and meet the woman, but beware of her. I fear that you are being deceived by some wicked spirit." Chūgorō only smiled at the old man's warning and hastened away. Several hours later, he re-entered the yashiki with a strangely dejected look. "Did you meet her?" whispered his comrade. "No, replied Chūgorō. She was not there. For the first time, she was not there. I think that she will never meet me again. I did wrong to tell you. I was very foolish to break my promise. The other vainly tried to console him. Chūgorō lay down and spoke no word more. He was trembling from head to foot, as if he had caught a chill. When the temple bells announced the hour of dawn, Chūgorō tried to get up and fell back senseless. He was evidently sick, deathly sick. A Chinese physician was summoned. "Why, the man has no blood," exclaimed the doctor after a careful examination. "There is nothing but water in his veins. It will be very difficult to save him." What maleficence is this? Everything was done that could be done to save Chūgorō's life, but in vain. He died as the sun went down. Then his comrade related the whole story. "Ah, I might have suspected as much," exclaimed the doctor. "No power could have saved him. He was not the first whom she destroyed." "Who is she? Or what is she?" the Ashigaru asked. "A foxwoman?" "No. She has been haunting this river from ancient time. She loves the blood of the young." "A serpent woman? A dragon woman?" "No, no. If you were to see her under that bridge by daylight, she would appear to you a very loathsome creature." "But what kind of a creature?" "Simply a frog. A great and ugly frog." Footnote 1. The Ashigaru were the lowest class a dead secret. A long time ago, in the province of Tamba, 1, there lived a rich merchant named Inamuraya Gensuke. He had a daughter called Osono. As she was very clever and pretty, he thought it would be a pity to let her grow up with only such teaching as the country teachers could give her. So he sent her, in care of some trusty attendants, to Kyoto, that she might be trained in the polite accomplishments taught to the ladies of the capital. After she had thus been educated, she was married to a friend of her father's family, a merchant named Nagaraya, and she lived happily with him for nearly 4 years. They had one child, a boy, but Osono fell ill and died in the 4th year after her marriage. On the night after the funeral of Osono, her little son said that his mama had come back and was in the room upstairs. She had smiled at him, but would not talk to him, so he became afraid and ran away. Then some of the family went upstairs to the room which had been Osono's, and they were startled to see, by the light of a small lamp which had been kindled before a shrine in that room, the figure of the dead mother. She appeared as if standing in front of a tansu, or chest of drawers, that still contained her ornaments and her wearing apparel. Her head and shoulders could be very distinctly seen, but from the waist downwards the figure thinned into invisibility. It was like an imperfect reflection of her, and transparent as a shadow on water. Then the folk were afraid and left the room. Below they consulted together, and the mother of Osono's husband said, "A woman is fond of her small things, and Osono was much attached to her belongings. Perhaps she has come back to look at them. Many dead persons will do that, unless the things be given to the parish temple. If we present Osono's robes and girdles to the temple, her spirit will probably find rest." It was agreed that this should be done as soon as possible. So on the following morning, the drawers were emptied, and all of Osono's ornaments and dresses were taken to the temple. But she came back the next night and looked at the kansu as before, and she came back also on the night following, and the night after that, and every night. And the house became a house of fear. The mother of Osono's husband then went to the parish temple and told the chief priest all that had happened and asked for ghostly counsel. The temple was a Zen temple, and the head priest was a learned old man known as Daigen Asho. He said, "There must be something about which she is anxious in or near that kornsu." "But we emptied all the drawers," replied the woman. "There is nothing in the kornsu." "Well," said Daigen Asho, "tonight I shall go to your house and keep watch in that room and see what can be done." You must give orders that no person shall enter the room while I am watching, unless I call." After sundown, Daigen Asho went to the house and found the room made ready for him. He remained there alone, reading the sutra, and nothing appeared until after the hour of the rat. Then the figure of Osono suddenly outlined itself in front of the earnest Tansu. Her face had a wistful look, and she kept her eyes fixed upon the earnest score. The priest uttered the holy formula prescribed in such cases, and then, addressing the figure by the kaimyo of Osono, said, "I have come here in order to help you. Perhaps in that unso there is something about which you have reason to feel anxious. Shall I try to find it for you?" The shadow appeared to give assent by a slight motion of the head, and the priest, rising, opened the top drawer. It was empty. Successively, he opened the second, the third, and the fourth drawer. He searched carefully behind them and beneath them. He carefully examined the interior of the chest. He found nothing, but the figure remained gazing as wistfully as before. "What can she want?" thought the priest. Suddenly it occurred to him that there might be something hidden under the paper with which the drawers were lined. He removed the lining of the first drawer. Nothing. He removed the lining of the second and third drawers. Still nothing. But under the lining of the lowermost drawer he found a letter. "Is this the thing about which you have been troubled?" he asked. The shadow of the woman turned toward him, her faint gaze fixed upon the letter. "Shall I burn it for you?" he asked. She bowed before him. "It shall be burned in the temple this very morning," he promised, "and no one shall read it except myself." The figure smiled and vanished. Dawn was breaking as the priest descended the stairs to find the family waiting anxiously below. "Do not be anxious," he said to them. "She will not appear again," and she never did. The letter was burned. It was a love letter written to Osono in the time of her studies at Kyoto, but the priest alone knew what was in it. And this Jikininki. Once, when Muso Kokushi, a priest of the Zen sect, was journeying alone through the province of Mino, he lost his way in a mountain district where there was nobody to direct him. For a long time he wandered about helplessly, and he was beginning to despair of finding shelter for the night when he perceived, on the top of a hill lighted by the last rays of the sun, one of those little hermitages called anjitsu, which are built for solitary priests. It seemed to be in ruinous condition, but he hastened to it eagerly and found that it was inhabited by an aged priest, from whom he begged the favor of a night's lodging. This the old man harshly refused, but he directed Muso to a certain hamlet in the valley adjoining where lodging and food could be obtained. Muso found his way to the hamlet, which consisted of less than a dozen farm cottages, and he was kindly received at the dwelling of the headman. 40 or 50 persons were assembled in the principal apartment at the moment of Muso's arrival, but he was shown into a small separate room where he was promptly supplied with food and bedding. Being very tired, he lay down to rest at an early hour, but a little before midnight he was roused from sleep by a sound of loud weeping in the next apartment. Presently the sliding screens were gently pushed apart, and a young man, carrying a lighted lantern, entered the room, respectfully saluted him and said, "Reverend Sir, it is my painful duty to tell you that I am now the responsible head of this house. Yesterday I was only the eldest son, but when you came here, tired as you were, we did not wish that you should feel embarrassed in any way. Therefore, we did not tell you that father had died only a few hours before. The people whom you saw in the next room are the inhabitants of this village. They all assembled here to pay their last respects to the dead, and now they are going to another village about 3 miles off, for by our custom, no one of us may remain in this village during the night after a death has taken place. We make the proper offerings and prayers. Then we go away, leaving the corpse alone. Strange things always happen in the house where a corpse has thus been left, so we think that it will be better for you to come away with us." We can find you good lodging in the other village. But perhaps, as you are a priest, you have no fear of demons or evil spirits. And if you are not afraid of being left alone with the body, you will be very welcome to the use of this poor house. However, I must tell you that nobody, except a priest, would dare to remain here tonight." Muso made answer, "For your kind intention and your generous hospitality, I am deeply grateful, but I am sorry that you did not tell me of your father's death when I came. For though I was a little tired, I certainly was not so tired that I should have found difficulty in doing my duty as a priest. Had you told me, I could have performed the service before your departure. As it is, I shall perform the service after you have gone away, and I shall stay by the body until morning. I do not know what you mean by your words about the danger of staying here alone, but I am not afraid of ghosts or demons. Therefore, please to feel no anxiety on my account." The young man appeared to be rejoiced by these assurances and expressed his gratitude in fitting words. Then the other members of the family and the folk assembled in the adjoining room, having been told of the priest's kind promises, came to thank him, after which the master of the house said, "Now, reverend sir, much as we regret to leave you alone, we must bid you farewell. By the rule of our village, none of us can stay here after midnight. We beg, kind sir, that you will take every care of your honorable body, while we are unable to attend upon you. And if you happen to hear or see anything strange during our absence, please tell us of the matter when we return in the morning." All then left the house, except the priest, who went to the room where the dead body was lying. The usual offerings had been set before the corpse, and a small Buddhist lamp, Tomyo, was burning. The priest recited the service and performed the funeral ceremonies, after which he entered into meditation. So meditating, he remained through several silent hours, and there was no sound in the deserted village. But when the hush of the night was at its deepest, there noiselessly entered a shape, vague and vast. And in the same moment, Musho found himself without power to move or speak. He saw that shape lift the corpse, as with hands, devour it, more quickly than a cat devours a rat, beginning at the head and eating everything, the hair and the bones and even the shroud. And the monstrous thing, having thus consumed the body, turned to the offerings and ate them also. Then it went away, as mysteriously as it had come. When the villagers returned next morning, they found the priest awaiting them at the door of the headman's dwelling. All in turn saluted him, and when they had entered and looked about the room, no one expressed any surprise at the disappearance of the dead body and the offerings. But the master of the house said to Muso, "Reverend sir, you have probably seen unpleasant things during the night. All of us were anxious about you, but now we are very happy to find you alive and unharmed. Gladly we would have stayed with you if it had been possible. But the law of our village, as I told you last evening, obliges us to quit our houses after a death has taken place and to leave the corpse alone. Whenever this law has been broken heretofore, some great misfortune has followed. Whenever it is obeyed, we find that the corpse and the offerings disappear during our absence. Perhaps you have seen the cause." Then Musho told of the dim and awful shape that had entered the death chamber to devour the body and the offerings. No person seemed to be surprised by his narration, and the master of the house observed, "What you have told us, reverend sir, agrees with what has been said about this matter from ancient time." Muso then inquired, "Does not the priest on the hill sometimes perform the funeral service for your dead?" "What priest?" the young man asked. "The priest who yesterday evening directed me to this village," answered Muso. "I called at his gore onjitsu on the hill yonder. He refused me lodging, but told me the way here." The listeners looked at each other, as in astonishment, and after a moment of silence, the master of the house said, "Reverend sir, there is no priest and there is no onjitsu on the hill. For the time of many generations, there has not been any resident priest in this neighborhood." Muso said nothing more on the subject, for it was evident that his kind hosts supposed him to have been deluded by some goblin. But after having bidden them farewell and obtained all necessary information as to his road, he determined to look again for the hermitage on the hill, and so to ascertain whether he had really been deceived. He found the Onjitsu underscore without any difficulty, and this time, its aged occupant invited him to enter. When he had done so, the hermit humbly bowed down before him, exclaiming, "Ah, I am ashamed. I am very much ashamed. I am exceedingly ashamed." "You need not be ashamed for having refused me shelter," said Musou. "You directed me to the village yonder, where I was very kindly treated, and I thank you for that favor." "I can give no man shelter," the recluse made answer, "and it is not for the refusal that I am ashamed. I am ashamed only that you should have seen me in my real shape, for it was I who devoured the corpse and the offerings last night before your eyes. You know, reverend sir, that I am a Jikininki, an eater of human flesh. Have pity upon me, and suffer me to confess the secret fault by which I became reduced to this condition. A long, long time ago, I was a priest in this desolate region. There was no other priest for many leagues around. So, in that time, the bodies of the mountain folk who died used to be brought here, sometimes from great distances, in order that I might repeat over them the holy service. But I repeated the service and performed the rites only as a matter of business. I thought only of the food and the clothes that my sacred profession enabled me to gain. And because of this selfish impiety, I was reborn, immediately after my death, into the state of a Jikininki. Since then, I have been obliged to feed upon the corpses of the people who die in this district. Every one of them I must devour in the way that you saw last night. Now, reverend sir, let me beseech you to perform a Sagaki service for me. Help me by your prayers, I entreat you, so that I may be soon able to escape from this horrible state of existence." No sooner had the hermit uttered this petition than he disappeared, and the hermitage also disappeared at the same instant, and Musou Kokushi found himself kneeling alone in the high grass, beside an ancient and moss-grown tomb of the form called Gorini. The Story of O-Tei. A long time ago, in the town of Niigata, in the province of Echizen, there lived a man called Nagao Chose. Nagao was the son of a physician and was educated for his father's profession. At an early age, he had been betrothed to a girl called O-Tei, the daughter of one of his father's friends, and both families had agreed that the wedding should take place as soon as Nagao had finished his studies. But the health of O-Tei proved to be weak, and in her 15th year she was attacked by a fatal consumption. When she became aware that she must die, she sent for Nagao to bid him farewell. As he knelt at her bedside, she said to him, "Nagao-sama, 1. My betrothed, we were promised to each other from the time of our childhood, and we were to have been married at the end of this year. But now I am going to die. The gods know what is best for us. If I were able to live for some years longer, I could only continue to be a cause of trouble and grief for others. With this frail body, I could not be a good wife, and therefore, even to wish to live for your sake would be a very selfish wish. I am quite resigned to die, and I want you to promise that you will not grieve. Besides, I want to tell you that I think we shall meet again." "Indeed, we shall meet again," Nagao answered earnestly. "And in that pure land, too, there will be no pain of separation." "Nay, nay," she responded softly. "I meant not the pure land. I believe that we are destined to meet again in this world, although I shall be buried tomorrow." Nagao looked at her wonderingly and saw her smile at his wonder. She continued in her gentle, dreamy voice, "Yes, I mean in this world, in your own present life, Nagao-sama, providing indeed that you wish it. Only for this thing to happen, I must again be born a girl and grow up to womanhood." "So you would have to wait 15, 16 years? That is a long time. But my promised husband, You are now only 19 years old." Eager to soothe her dying moments, he answered tenderly, "To wait for you, my betrothed, were no less a joy than a duty. We are pledged to each other for the time of 7 existences." "But you doubt?" she questioned, watching his face. "My dear one," he answered, "I doubt whether I should be able to know you in another body, under another name, unless you can tell me of a sign or token." "That I cannot do," she said. "Only the gods and the Buddhas know how and where we shall meet. But I am sure, very, very sure, that if you be not unwilling to receive me, I shall be able to come back to you. Remember these words of mine." She ceased to speak, and her eyes closed. She was dead. Nagao had been sincerely attached to O-Tei, and his grief was deep. He had a mortuary tablet made, inscribed with her Zokumyo, and he placed the tablet in his gore Butsudan Men, and every day set offerings before it. He thought a great deal about the strange things that O-Tei had said to him just before her death, and in the hope of pleasing her spirit, he wrote a solemn promise to wed her if she could ever return to him in another body. This written promise he sealed with his seal, and placed in the Butsudan beside the mortuary tablet of O-Tei. Nevertheless, as Nagao was an only son, it was necessary that he should marry. He soon found himself obliged to yield to the wishes of his family and to accept a wife of his father's choosing. After his marriage, he continued to set offerings before the tablet of O-Tei, and he never failed to remember her with affection. But by degrees, her image became dim in his memory, like a dream that is hard to recall. And the years went by. During those years, many misfortunes came upon him. He lost his parents by death, then his wife and his only child, so that he found himself alone in the world. He abandoned his desolate home and set out upon a long journey in the hope of forgetting his sorrows. One day, in the course of his travels, he arrived at Ikao, a mountain village still famed for its thermal springs and for the beautiful scenery of its neighborhood. In the village inn at which he stopped, a young girl came to wait upon him, and at the first sight of her face, he felt his heart leap as it had never leaped before. So strangely did she resemble O-Tei that he pinched himself to make sure that he was not dreaming. As she went and came, bringing fire and food or arranging the chamber of the guest, her every attitude and motion revived in him some gracious memory of the girl to whom he had been pledged in his youth. He spoke to her, and she responded in a soft, clear voice, of which the sweetness saddened him with the sadness of other days. Then, in great wonder, he questioned her, saying, "Elder sister 3, so much do you look like a person whom I knew long ago, that I was startled when you first entered this room. Pardon me, therefore, for asking what is your native place and what is your name?" Immediately, and in the unforgotten voice of the dead, she thus made answer, "My name is O-Tei, and you are Nagao Chosei of Ichigo, my promised husband. 17 years ago, I died in Niigata. Then you made in writing a promise to marry me if ever I could come back to this world in the body of a woman. And you sealed that written promise with your seal and put it in the Butsudan Ungur, beside the tablet inscribed with my name, and therefore I came back." As she uttered these last words, she fell unconscious. Nagao married her, and the marriage was a happy one. But at no time afterwards could she remember what she had told him in answer to his question at Ikao. Neither could she remember anything of her previous existence. The recollection of the former birth, mysteriously kindled in the moment of that meeting, had again become obscured, and so the Screen-Maiden, related in the Otogi Hyaku Monogatari, says the old Japanese author Hakubayen Rosui. In Chinese and in Japanese books, there are related many stories, both of ancient and of modern times, about pictures that were so beautiful as to exercise a magical influence upon the beholder. And concerning such beautiful pictures, whether pictures of flowers or of birds or of people painted by famous artists. It is further told that the shapes of the creatures or the persons therein depicted would separate themselves from the paper or the silk upon which they had been painted and would perform various acts, so that they became, by their own will, really alive. We shall not now repeat any of the stories of this class which have been known to everybody from ancient times. But even in modern times, the fame of the pictures painted by Hishigawa Kichibei, Hishigawa's portraits, has become widespread in the land. He died in the 18th year of Kyoho, 1733. The painter to whom he refers, better known to collectors as Hishigawa Kichibei Moronobu, flourished during the latter part of the 17th century. Beginning his career as a dyer's apprentice, he won his reputation as an artist about 1680, when he may be said to have founded the ukiyo-e school of illustration. Hishigawa was especially a delineator of what are called furyu, elegant manners, the aspects of life among the upper classes of society. He then proceeds to relate the following story about one of the so-called portraits. There was a young scholar of Kyoto whose name was Toki. He used to live in the street called Muromachi. One evening, while on his way home after a visit, his attention was attracted by an old single-leaf screen exposed for sale before the shop of a dealer in second-hand goods. It was only a paper-covered screen, but there was painted upon it the full-length figure of a girl, which caught the young man's fancy. The price asked was very small. Tokei bought the screen and took it home with him. When he looked again at the screen, in the solitude of his own room, the picture seemed to him much more beautiful than before. Apparently, it was a real likeness, the portrait of a girl 15 or 16 years old, and every little detail in the painting of the hair, eyes, eyelashes, mouth, had been executed with a delicacy and a truth beyond praise. The menagerie unscores seemed like a lotus blossom courting favor. The lips were like the smile of a red flower. The whole young face was inexpressibly sweet. If the real girl so portrayed had been equally lovely, no man could have looked upon her without losing his heart. And Take believed that she must have been thus lovely, for the figure seemed alive, ready to reply to anybody who might speak to it. Also written, Megiri SS, the exterior canthus of the eye. The Japanese, like the old Greek and the old Arabian poets, have many curious, dainty words and similes to express particular beauties of the hair, eyes, eyelids, lips, fingers, etc. Gradually, as he continued to gaze at the picture, he felt himself bewitched by the charm of it. "Can there really have been in this world," he murmured to himself, "so delicious a creature? How gladly would I give my life, nay, 1,000 years of life, to hold her in my arms even for a moment." The Japanese author says, for a few seconds. In short, he became enamored of the picture, so much enamored of it as to feel that he never could love any woman except the person whom it represented. Yet that person, if still alive, could no longer resemble the painting. Perhaps she had been buried long before he was born. Day by day, nevertheless, this hopeless passion grew upon him. He could not eat. He could not sleep. Neither could he occupy his mind with those studies which had formerly delighted him. He would sit for hours before the picture, talking to it, neglecting or forgetting everything else. And at last he fell sick, so sick that he believed himself going to die. Now, among the friends of Tokei, there was one venerable scholar who knew many strange things about old pictures and about young hearts. This aged scholar, hearing of Tokei's illness, came to visit him and saw the screen and understood what had happened. Then Tokei, being questioned, confessed everything to his friend and declared, "If I cannot find such a woman, I shall die." The old man said, "That picture was painted by Hishigawa Kichibei, painted from life. The person whom it represented is not now in the world. but it is said that Hishigawa Kichibei painted her mind as well as her form, and that her spirit lives in the picture. So, I think that you can win her. Tokei half rose from his bed and stared eagerly at the speaker. You must give her a name, the old man continued, and you must sit before her picture every day and keep your thoughts constantly fixed upon her and call her gently by the name which you have given her until she answers you. Answers me, exclaimed the lover in breathless amazement. Oh yes, the advisor responded. She will certainly answer you, but you must be ready when she answers you to present her with what I am going to tell you. I will give her my life, cried Tokei. No, said the old man. You will present her with a cup of wine that has been bought at 100 different wine shops. Then she will come out of the screen to accept the wine. After that, probably she herself will tell you what to do. With these words, the old man went away. His advice aroused Tokei from despair. At once, he seated himself before the picture and called it by the name of a girl, what name the Japanese narrator has forgotten to tell us, over and over again, very tenderly. That day it made no answer, nor the next day, nor the next. But Tokei did not lose faith or patience, and after many days, it suddenly one evening answered to its name. Hi. Yes. Then quickly, some of the wine from 100 different wine shops was poured out and reverentially presented in a little cup. And the girl stepped from the screen and walked upon the matting of the room and knelt to take the cup from Tokei's hand, asking with a delicious smile, "How could you love me so much?" Says the Japanese narrator, she was much more beautiful than the picture, beautiful to the tips of her fingernails, beautiful also in heart and temper, lovelier than anybody else in the world. What answer Tokei made to her question is not recorded. It will have to be imagined. But will you not soon get tired of me? She asked. Never while I live, he protested. And after? She persisted. For the Japanese bride is not satisfied with love for one lifetime only. Let us pledge ourselves to each other, he entreated, for the time of 7 existences. If you are ever unkind to me, she said, I will go back to the screen. They pledged each other. I suppose that Tokei was a good boy, for his bride never returned to the screen. The space that she had occupied upon it remained a blank, exclaims the Japanese author. How very seldom do such Hōrai, blue vision of depth lost in height, sea and sky interblending through luminous haze. The day is of spring and the hour morning, only sky and sea, one azure enormity. In the fore, ripples are catching a silvery light and threads of foam are swirling. But a little further off, no motion is visible, nor anything save color. Dim, warm blue of water widening away to melt into blue of air. Horizon there is none, only distance soaring into space, infinite concavity hollowing before you and hugely arching above you, the color deepening with the height. But far in the midway blue there hangs a faint vision of palace towers, with high roofs horned and curved like moons, some shadowing of splendor strange and old, illumined by a sunshine soft as memory. What I have thus been trying to describe is a kakemono, that is to say, a Japanese painting on silk suspended to the wall of my alcove. And the name of it is shinkyu, which signifies mirage, but the shapes of the mirage are unmistakable. Those are the glimmering portals of Hōrai the Blessed, and those are the moony roofs of the palace of the Dragon King. And the fashion of them, though limned by a Japanese brush of today, is the fashion of things Chinese, 2100 years ago. Thus much is told of the place in the Chinese books of that time. In Hōrai there is neither death nor pain, and there is no winter. The flowers in that place never fade, and the fruits never fail. And if a man taste of those fruits even but once, he he can never again feel thirst or hunger. In Hōrai grow the enchanted plants, Sorenshi and Orikugo-aoi and Orbi-konto, which heal all manner of sickness. And there grows also the magical grass, Onyo Shinshi, that quickens the dead. And the magical grass is watered by a fairy water, of which a single drink confers perpetual youth. The people of Hōrai eat their rice out of very, very small bowls, but the rice never diminishes within those bowls, however much of it be eaten, until the eater desires no more. And the people of Hōrai drink their wine out of very, very small cups, but no man can empty one of those cups, however stoutly he may drink, until there comes upon him the pleasant drowsiness of intoxication. All this and more is told in the legends of the time of the Shin dynasty. But that the people who wrote down those legends ever saw Hōrai, even in a mirage, is not believable. For really there are no enchanted fruits which leave the eater forever satisfied, nor any magical grass which revives the dead, nor any fountain of fairy water, nor any bowls which never lack rice, nor any cups which never lack wine. It is not true that sorrow and death never enter Hōrai. Neither is it true that there is not any winter. The winter in Hōrai is cold, and winds then bite to the bone, and the heaping of snow is monstrous on the roofs of the Dragon King. Nevertheless, there are wonderful things in Hōrai, and the most wonderful of all has not been mentioned by any Chinese writer. I mean the atmosphere of Hōrai. It is an atmosphere peculiar to the place, and because of it, the sunshine in Hōrai is whiter than any other sunshine, a milky light that never dazzles, astonishingly clear but very soft. This atmosphere is not of our human period. It is enormously old, so old that I feel afraid when I try to think how old it is. And it is not a mixture of nitrogen and oxygen. It is not made of air at all, but of ghost. The substance of quintillions of generations of souls blended into one immense translucency. Souls of people who thought in ways never resembling our ways. Whatever mortal man inhales that atmosphere, he takes into his blood the thrilling of these spirits, and they change the sense within him, reshaping his notions of space and time, so that he can see only as they used to see, and feel only as they used to feel, and think only as they used to think. Soft as sleep are these changes of sense, and Hōrai, discerned across them, might thus be described. Because in Hōrai there is no knowledge of great evil, the hearts of the people never grow old, and by reason of being always young in heart, the people of Hōrai smile from birth until death, except when the gods send sorrow among them, and faces then are veiled until the sorrow goes away. All folk in Hōrai love and trust each other, as if all were members of a single household, and the speech of the women is like birdsong, because the hearts of them are light as the souls of birds, and the swaying of the sleeves of the maidens at play seems a flutter of wide, soft wings. In Hōrai, nothing is hidden but grief, because there is no reason for shame, and nothing is locked away, because there could not be any theft. And by night as well as by day, all doors remain unbarred, because there is no reason for fear. And because the people are fairies, though mortal, all things in Hōrai, except the palace of the Dragon King, are small and quaint and queer. And these fairy folk do really eat their rice out of very, very small bowls, and drink their wine out of very, very small cups. Much of this seeming would be due to the inhalation of that ghostly atmosphere, but not all, for the spell wrought by the dead is only the charm of an ideal, the glamour of an ancient hope. And something of that hope has found fulfillment in many hearts, in the simple beauty of unselfish lives, in the sweetness of woman. Evil winds from the west are blowing over Hōrai, and the magical atmosphere, alas, is shrinking away before them. It lingers now in patches only, in bands. like those long, bright bands of cloud that train across the landscapes of Japanese painters. Under these shreds of the elfish vapor, you still can find Hōrai, but not everywhere. Remember that Hōrai is also called Shinkiro, which signifies mirage, the vision of the intangible. And the vision is fading, never again to appear, save in pictures and poems.